Hello and good evening, and welcome to this month's Whiskey Me live tasting for January 2024, our first live tasting of the year. Oftentimes we get new members in January because lots of people are lucky enough to receive a Whiskey Me membership as a gift. So welcome if this is your first ever live tasting. Hope you enjoy it. If you want to we only do one of these a month, but if you want to get a taste for more, then you can always go back and look at our past ones as well, because we've got a whole wealth of live tastings going back 3 or 4 years now, with tons of content with different producers, whiskey blenders, whiskey makers, and whiskey experts. So it's a real great sort of knowledge base of facts, an interesting chat about whiskies. This month will be no different to that. We have 2 great guests. Of course, we sent out 2 whiskies this month. The Scotch single malt, which was a partnership with our friends at Carn, the Glenlossie. And then we have our world whiskey, which this month comes from Finland, Kyrö distillery. We're going to be joined by Miika to taste that with him in about 15 minutes. But we're going to start, as we always do, with the single malt Scotch. And I'm going to bring in Thomas from Carn. Hey, mate.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. How are you? I'm going to make us do that.
Very well, thanks. Very well. Good to see you.
Yeah. Thanks so much for joining us for the tasting. We were just having a little chat then before we went on about Glenlossie and how it's not a distillery many people know, and in some ways sort of quite hidden and unremarkable, but in other ways that kind of makes it remarkable.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So we'll talk about Glenlossie in a second, but you actually work for Carn, so maybe it's best first of all to introduce what Carn do. And for members who've been around the block a little while, they'll of course be familiar with what you do because we've partnered with you a couple of times in the past. But for those who are not familiar with Carn, give us the spiel, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So Carn is one of our brands. So the kind of parent brand is Morrison Scotch Whisky Distillers, and Carn is our independent bottling, or one of our independent bottling kind of areas of that. So we have just like lots and lots of different casks, lots of distilleries, and we get to decide what goes into bottle, basically. Quite small batch releases. We do kind of 2 or 3 a year for our strictly limited range. So that is the kind of under 10 years old, might be finished in a cask, 47.5%. So similar to the Glenlossie that we're going to be trying tonight. And then we have our Celebration of the Cask, which is slightly more mature stock, normally bottled at cask strength. And then we've got our Family Reserve as well, which is older again and bottled at cask strength. So really nice kind of 3-tier portfolio within Carn, and just giving access to great liquid from distilleries that you might not have known or that are not really out there, just like Glenlossie, where you don't see a lot of it, but that doesn't mean it's not really, really good. It's just because it's required elsewhere, which I'm sure we'll get onto.
Yeah, so is that sort of part of the mission of the brand, of the Carn brand, to sort of celebrate distilleries that perhaps aren't your kind of household name brands, or is it just kind of like whatever tastes good?
It's a lot of liquid focus. So it's what we are able to procure that is going to taste really good, and what we can eventually put into a bottle. So we have earmarked for Celebration of the Cask, or strictly limited, or Family Reserve. But yeah, like celebrating these smaller distilleries, or not smaller distilleries, but things that you don't see often. Like you barely ever see Glenlossie. Similarly, I think you did a T&E next previously with Carn too, and that's just a distillery you don't see even independently very often. Same as Glenlossie, where the liquid is fantastic. It's a huge distillery, but it's just not particularly known.
Yeah, so let's talk about Glenlossie. Maybe like do you want to start with a little potted history of perhaps the earlier history of it before we get into what it functions like today?
Yeah, so it's founded kind of late 1800s, 1876, and it was always made, or it was always kind of the plan for it was to be a blender's dream, a blender's distillery, producing single malt whiskey to go into blends, to go into a lot of grain whiskey in order to make the blends desirable, tasty, a consistent product as well, which is something that blenders need, because you want to have the same product, whether it's in a bar anywhere across the world or in Scotland, you want it to be tasting the same, and you get that consistency with Glenlossie. So it always started off as quite high production, as with every Scotch whisky distillery. It's been through several different hands during its 130, 140 years. Again, it had a bit of a revamp in the more recently, in the 2018, something like that. But yeah, the production site has been the same ever since. It's got a huge warehousing facility, 200,000 casks, which is just mind-blowing to think about that much whiskey maturing on site. It has a sister distillery, Mannockmore, which people may be slightly more familiar with, I guess.
Yeah, we featured Mannockmore about 2 years ago, I think, on Whiskey Me.
Okay.
That was an indie bottling as well, but it wasn't with you guys, I don't think. I think it was with someone else. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, it's one of these that it's similar to Mannockmore that turns up occasionally in independents. They have one core release product. It's owned by Diageo, so it goes into a lot of their blended products. And like I say, it's something that needs consistency. The typical character, I guess you would say, for Glenlossie is really grassy. It's, without sounding too cliche, it's very typical Speyside. It's soft, it's light, it's bright, like all those sort of things. Just producing really, really good single malt whiskey, which goes into blends to make them outstanding.
Yeah. So you mentioned it's owned by Diageo. Mannockmore is, Glenlossie is. So we can assume that, you know, a lot of this is going to be going into Johnny Walker, right? Maybe J&B as well.
Yeah, just all of their blended portfolio. I'm sure, like I say, the volume is there that the distillery produces. It's over 2 million litres, or might be near 3 million litres now, of alcohol a year. So it's a huge site to produce whiskey. So that'll be divvied up internally for where they desire it to go, I guess.
Yeah, and I mean, so little of it is bottled as single malt. Like you say, there's the Flora and Fauna range, which was kind of launched by Diageo, I guess, to celebrate these distilleries that didn't have their own bottling, but you know, so that people got to try it. And then there's independent bottlings, but it's not. We were saying this before, like Mannockmore, like Tina, it's not one that you really come across much as an independent bottling. So there's just, you know, we must be looking at 99% plus of the whiskey made there is going into blends, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would say like as close to 100% as you get without being 100%, because this like, you know, single casks come out of this place rather than anything on any sort of level of volume. So it's occasional single casks. It's occasionally single casks under 10, very, very, very seldom over 10 years old or beyond that sort of age range. So yeah, like it's a tiny percentage that gets to be drunk as a single malt.
So it's pretty special. It's pretty special then, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm going to drink some right now.
Yeah.
So yeah, when we were doing the because I think I tasted the sample of this 6 months ago, maybe even 9 months ago, and wrote down my tasting notes. And for me, it was like orange soda was this kind of, there was a brightness to it. And you mentioned kind of grassy, bright and all that kind of thing. And it was almost like that, you know, when you open a can of Fanta and it's not even really tasting the Fanta, it's that crack and that hiss and that sort of escape of orange aroma. There was definitely something of that to it for me. Yeah,
I think like it's got a little bit of spice just at the front, but then that just totally disappears, and it's not like really vanilla sweetness. It's more that kind of like you say, zesting an orange or something like that, where it's got that brightness on the palate. I think like it's a 5 years old, but it tastes beyond that. And it's just really, really nice. It's cool when you get bourbon barrels and you can get that character really shining through without it being just kind of stock, if you will.
Yeah. I mean, this is where I think this is a great example of a bourbon barrel just doing exactly what you want it to do, right? It's just augmenting that distillery character, polishing everything off, but not introducing like a shitload of sort of vanilla and caramel and stuff to the flavor.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's just it's just a really cool to see an expression that is really just going beyond the distillery character, because it's quite oily. Like it's got a lot of texture to it. Like it's got weight in the spirit, and then it's just completely brightened up with a bourbon barrel.
Yeah, am I right? I might be getting too geeky. I don't know. Maybe you can refresh my memory, but there's something in distillation, right? It's got purifier pipes or something that'll give an oiliness to it.
So it's got purifier pipes that basically they influence the reflux in the line arm. So that brings back the kind of oilier, heavier spirit into the distillation, and that'll end up in the heart or in the cup of what eventually comes out. It's quite a unique process, I guess. I guess every distillery's got its little quirks about how it gets to the final product, but I think you can really get that oily mouthfeel character to it, because it's got like long fermentation by most accounts, so you would expect it to be really, really light, but it's really got that kind of depth to it, that a bit more body, I would say.
Yeah, that's nice, that, isn't it? To have that sort of vibrancy of character, but then to still have weight in that kind of oiliness, you know, because sometimes I guess light sort of fresh whiskies can be a little bit too light on the palate as well, you know, and this has got some length to it, which I guess is probably one of the reasons why it's so prized by blenders, right? Because it's going to add weight and depth.
Yeah, that's the thing, is if you can produce that on a mass scale and put it into as a topper into blends, if you will, and say that's what we want across the board for X, Y, and Z release. That's worth its weight, I guess.
Right, we've got some tasting notes coming up. I'm going to just flash a few up. I mean, from what I can see, everyone is on board with the orange, but maybe that's just kind of mind play, mystical.
I saw Candy Floss as well, and I thought that was pretty spot on.
Well, you know what? Again, that might be my fault, because Candy Floss was one of the 3 tasting notes we put on the pouch. So Candy Floss, orange, and ginger, I think it is. And you know, that ginger again is that you mentioned that kind of initial upfront spice. You do get that. Just again, bourbon barrels, when they're performing well, you can get a gingery note that comes through from it, and it's really pleasant.
Yeah.
Orange, ginger. There you go.
It's funny you mentioned Fanta, because it's got a bit of apples there as well, and I was like, kind of tango apple sort of fizz, but maybe it was just that placebo of opening a can.
Yeah, but I mean, do you know what? I love it when you put together tasting notes. I mean, this is probably just like bias on my part, and there's a sort of theme to it. And for this one, it did feel a bit like Fairground, or like, I don't know, maybe Circus or something, because you got your orange soda, you got gingery, you know, sweets maybe, and then the Candy Floss in it just feels like a trip to the Fairground. Maybe that's reading a bit too much into it. I mean, it's just a whiskey, but
no, absolutely, like that kind of artificial sweetness, like, but it's not artificial sort of thing.
Yeah, had a bottle of Flora for a 10-year-old a few years ago. Taste it. Do you know what? I don't know if I've actually had the Flora and Fauna Glenlossie before. I mean, I probably have at some point, but yeah, maybe no more than once. Can get a bit confusing with those Flora and Faunas, because obviously they all look the same.
Yeah, it's not one you see very often. Like, even I think you see more of the Manickmore Flora and Fauna, or even a Thrusk or that sort of thing.
Well, Mortlach used to be the kind
of
common one, didn't it? Before they obviously got rid of it and, you know, put it into its own release. Mortlach, you always used to see Mortlach Flora and Fauna, because it was a fantastic value whiskey, because that was 16 years old, I think.
16, yeah.
For like £45 a bottle. Dalhuin, it's great. Yeah. Cool. All right, good stuff. Well, I think everyone likes it. I certainly do. Let's move on to Miika, who's currently muted and not on his camera. So I'm hoping he's listening. There he comes. Thought you were gonna let me down there for a second. He's gone out to have a coffee. Welcome, Miika. I was going to say welcome back, because we've done Kyrö with Gin Me, our sister company. Yours was one of the first gins we featured about a year ago, I think. And for anyone who subscribes to Gin Me, they missed a treat if they weren't watching the live tasting, because for reasons that will become apparent very shortly, I conducted my part of the tasting from inside a sauna, and it was fun, albeit quite hot. 25 minutes in a sauna starts to get a bit unpleasant. But Miika, of course, you'll be the expert because you're Finnish, and of course, the Finns invented sauna.
Yeah. I mean, we're the nation of saunas and rye, so can't go wrong there.
Well, and of course, sauna plays into your founding story, right? Because the whole idea of the distillery was conceived in a sauna, correct?
Correct. So we were passing a bottle of Rittenhouse rye around, and I was going on to a bunch of friends about why are we living in a nation that absolutely thrives on rye, so eating it in bread, in porridge, in everything, and why aren't we distilling it? Why are we only doing barley vodka and letting the guys over in the States do all the rye? So this was back in 2012, and after one of those Rocky movie-esque training montage periods, we got going with the distillery in 2014. So we're definitely not in the Glenlossie age. We're quite the opposite end, but we're doing something at the same time new, but at the same time just really bringing out like what Finnish agriculture and food culture is out to the world in a whiskey format. Yeah.
And I think we met probably not that long after the distillery first opened, because we were both at the World Whiskey Forum in Cotswolds.
I think,
yeah. And that was when we first met, and you did a talk and I did a talk, and I was just like, oh my God, this is so cool what these guys are up to. This kind of just fixation on rye, like obsession with rye, basically. So yeah, I mean, you mentioned there you eat it in porridge, in bread. Talk to me a little bit more about what rye it means to Finland. Rye porridge. I've never had that before. What is that even like?
It's like oatmeal, really, but rye. So you'll get those notes that you'll get if you're already drinking the whiskey or soon drinking the whiskey. There's those. I think, carrying over from the last tasting notes, there's definitely hints of ginger there. There's licorice root. There's a lot of this like sweeter, earthier spiciness going on, and it fits great into the porridge format, but it fits, I think, even better into the whiskey format. And rye is just a crop that grows fantastically well here up in the north. We're remote. We're quite cold, but the soil is good. The water is good. It's a hardy crop, so we've always farmed a lot of rye and eaten per capita a lot of rye, where, let's say, elsewhere in continental Europe, rye would be more a animal feed grain or a rotational crop. But here you can really get the flavor in, because, right now we're down to about 4 hours of sunlight per day here in the south. And at the distillery, it's about 3 hours of sunlight right now. But on the summer, it's the flip side. So you get 22 hours of sunlight per day, which means short summer, but intense sunlight makes for small but very flavorful grain. And it's great for distilling.
It's a hard grain to work with, though, right? I mean, I understand it has its issues. It can be kind of, porridgey, right? When you're mashing it is part of the problem, right? So how do you overcome that exactly? How does the production process maybe differ from, say, single malt Scotch?
So I would say, like, to what you were saying earlier about us being fixated on rye, it's very much true. And I think rye makes you be fixated on it, because you have to really gear your whole process and your knowledge and your understanding around how to distill rye. I mean, if we're doing, let's say, 51% rye and 49% barley or oats or corn or whatever, it'd be easier. But we're doing 100% rye and nothing else. So there's no other grain going through our pipeline at all. And that means all of the process, all of our expertise, the pumping systems, the pre-mashing systems have to be very robust and made around distilling this rye grain, which doesn't have a husk like barley does. So what it means is that you can't use the husks to filter. So all of the proteins, all of the solids go from milling to mashing to fermenting to distilling. And that really does take it out of the equipment.
Yeah, I was just saying about fixation on rye. I've heard distillers talk about how it can end up like glue, literally fix things if you're not careful.
Yeah, you can ask my co-founder Kalle, our head distiller, who's now into his 7th cycle of pre-mashers. They keep getting more powerful and more powerful in order not to have it gum up the whole process already when it comes out of the mill.
So with any whiskey, you have to have enzymes in order to convert the starches into sugar ready for fermentation. And with malted barley whiskey, Scotch whiskey, those enzymes are all provided by the malted barley. But with a lot of non-malted barley distilleries, looking especially at like bourbons and a lot of ryes in America, they either have to have a portion of malted barley in their mash bill that fronts up the enzymes, or they'll add sort of exogenous enzymes to the mash, sort of like an enzyme isolate. So what is your approach to getting these enzymes?
We malt all of it. So it's not only we do 100% rye, we do 100% malted rye, which makes it even slightly more difficult and definitely more expensive to make. But at the same time, Finland is not a historical whiskey region. We have to, and we get to, formulate a whole new culture of taste and process around what is Finnish rye whiskey or European rye whiskey. So we figured that let's combine these fantastic notes that we get from the maltings, this added toastiness, the enhancement of the sweetness of the rye grain, where US ryes are considered traditionally to be quite spicy, especially when you go up in the rye content, whereas we are 100% rye, but so that sort of that earthy tonality of spicy and more sweet. And all of that stems from using 100% malted rye, which grows in Finland. So we only use local rye, and then obviously running it through our process, including a crazy long fermentation of about 144 hours.
Wow, that is long.
Yeah.
And of course, I think like you got to, for people who don't make whiskey, it's sort of like, okay, cool, so what? But of course, you need much more fermenters if you're going to ferment that long, because it's taking up space, right? And you need to keep the process going. Like, if you're fermenting for half the amount of time, you need half the amount of fermentation vessels. So it's expensive, right?
Yeah, it is, and but we also, like, it's not just sort of like an accidental feature of the process. We really do it for the taste, because about 72 hours gets us all the alcohol we need out of the mash, and the extra 72 hours is for flavor. So it's like a secondary fermentation where there's a lot of lactic acid reaction going on in the ferment, but we also control the temperature, so we know that it doesn't just go randomly off. We know that we can drive a lot of esters, a lot of aldehydes, a lot of flavor components that, again, when we don't filter anything in the process, all of that goes into the still unfiltered, unmitigated. So we get the maximum amount of the rye taste treated with the great fermentation process.
And so distillation, is that much the same way as we would see it being done in Scotland, like a double pot still distillation, or is there something else to it?
No, not really. I mean, it's a fairly standard Scottish process from there on out. So we've done now a couple of distillery expansions. So you mentioned, the gin we make. So anything we can make out of rye is free game for us. So the gin is also rye based, but it meant that in the beginning we were really cramped for production, especially on the whiskey side. So 2016, we separated the lines, and then late 2019, early 20s, we expanded the whiskey line to the current format, where we have 2 pot stills, one 9,000 liter pot still for wash, and 7,000 liter pot still for spirits distillation. So we're kind of combining distilling traditions, equipment styles from anywhere and everywhere, and making it our own culture of distilling.
Well, since we're running through the whole process kind of in order, let's talk about maturation next, maybe.
Yeah.
So how does that bit work?
Sometimes slowly, sometimes faster. It gets.
But the cold winters aren't a great accelerant for maturation.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great region to be in for many reasons, but it's slightly challenging on the maturation side because we get down to about minus 30 degrees Celsius. And in the summer, we go up to plus 30 degrees. So there's like a 60-degree band of temperatures that we go through.
Just on that.
Yeah.
I mean, I get obviously the spirit in the cask, I guess, is somewhere like 65%, 70% ABV, right? You're not in danger of getting near its freezing point, are you?
No, it's there's enough alcohol there, so we don't get there. But also, we have to, or we want to enhance the maturation during the winter time. So when we built our new phase of the distillery, we've now gone fully renewable energy production. So all of the energy is produced by bio waste, food waste biogas. So there's local bakeries and larger scale food factories that produce spent grain and all of that, and it gets turned into biogas, and we use that to run the production. But also we don't only heat exchange the energy to the next batch, we use it to pump through hot water throughout the premises. So we heat the buildings and we heat the warehouse. Do a bit of pumping of heat there.
Do you cycle heat, like to sort of simulate a normal day and night thing? Yeah, okay,
interesting. Yeah, quite a bit. Obviously, we're in batch production, so it's not continuous, but it does enhance the maturation. But also then we are, let's say Finland, to put it nicely, we're a high regulation country. So the government has some freaky ideas about maturing whiskey, including that if we go above 23 degrees Celsius, things will just randomly explode. We have to air condition the warehouses. Yeah, so we have to air condition the warehouses, and then we have this very involved climate system where we control heat, humidity, and airflow in segregated segments. But it's great because we get to accelerate our learning about how rye whiskey in Finland matures. Nobody's done it before.
So if you're managing humidity and cleaning the air, I mean, is there any capture of angel share spirit involved in any of that? Anything usable that you could run back through a still and turn into a, I don't know, angel share vodka or something?
We're not quite that big. Also, like there's some interesting technology coming out of turning carbon dioxide from fermentation into a bioreactor induced biomass, which you can then distill. So you can basically get alcohol out of air. But there are significant volume problems and taste problems still with the technology. So we're not venturing there yet, but we're trying out all sorts of funky stuff.
Well, I remember when you launched, or just before you launched, actually, the rye whiskey, and I was with our mutual friend Michael Vachon, and he had a bottle, and I was on a train with him. I don't know where or why, and he had been kind of teasing me all day, saying, "I've got a bottle of Kyrö's of rye," and I knew what you guys were up to. I like rye whiskey. I knew they were doing 100%. Rye, which is in itself exciting, and we drank it on the train, and honestly it's still one of my peak whiskey experiences, because it was delicious whiskey, but it was also just so much fun tasting one of the first bottles of this product. I mean, there wasn't even a bottle for it, it was just in a kind of sample bottle, and it was just absolutely delicious. And as I said, I think on the email that we sent to all of our members, when we launched the World Whiskey subscription about nearly 3 years ago now, ever since, I've always had in my mind, we have to do Kyrö's rye whiskey, because I think what you're doing there just epitomizes the potential of world whiskey and what it should be like, that being reflective of its place and its people and its culture, but with the kind of all the great learnings of Scotch whiskey or American whiskey production, Irish whiskey production that have been tried and tested over the last couple of centuries. So yeah, that's I think it's a fantastic product, and I love what you guys are doing.
Well, thank you very much, and a pleasure to be with you here in the tasting and have your customers sampling, your members sampling the whiskey, because I'm really happy about. Let's say if we really our whiskey making story properly got going late 2016, and now about seven and a half years later, we're at a point where we're finally releasing our core range, and that's why it's so good to be out here and taste this with you. And I'm really happy with this. On average, about 4 years old product that we now have in the glass.
Did we mention what wood you're using? You're using a combination of virgin and ex-bourbon, is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
So American oak fits best to our profile because we have that slight spiciness and the sweetness together. The extra tannins from most of the European variants of oak is not really what we're looking for. So we find the American white oak to be perfect for the purpose.
Yeah, nice. And I mean, for me, there's this sort of unmistakable kind of breadiness to it, like bread crust, granary, kind of nutty, I guess rye bread really, or like sourdough rye, whatever. And then the barrel introduces a bit of that caramel quality. It's sort of sweetness to it. There's obviously a little bit of spice there as well, but it's got, I don't know, it's one of those whiskeys where it tastes like it's made out of grain, if you know what I mean. And it sounds it's a weird thing to say, but of course we're so used to talking about whiskey with language like apples and, well, let's take Glenlossie for example. It was all like orange soda and apples and grass and everything. It's like, well, I suppose actually grass is pretty accurate. But it doesn't really sound like you're talking about cereal, whereas this, it's hard to avoid that kind of language because it tastes like an agricultural product,
Yeah, and you shouldn't. And I mean, we know that it's something that if you're primarily looking for sherry notes or bourbon notes from the whiskey, then this is going to be something different, and you might like it or might not like it. But we feel that introducing a whole new style of liquid cannot be kind of like Me Too kind of effort where we want to be the 7th best Speyside style distillery or just make a sherry bomb along with all the good ones out there already. Somebody like Glenfarclas is just going to kill us in that department, make it 30 pounds cheaper and maybe better. So we have to do our own style and find our own voice. I mean, the world doesn't really need more alcohol. It just needs more great new taste and new story driven experiences, and that's what we're going for.
Yeah. Right, let's get some tasting notes up here because there's been quite a few. Well, let's see. It smells so good. It does smell good. I like this. Lots of oily putty on the nose, and I kind of get that. It's got this. Yeah, there's. I mean, there's a kind of certain rye can sometimes smell a little bit gluey, I think, or Play-Doh-y, and I don't think this one's got a particularly strong sense of that, but there's a touch of it there, Yeah, it's an interesting one. What else we got? Warm buttery malt loaf with peppery finish. No pun intended. Of course, yeah, that you must get that one all the time.
Yeah, well, we can't avoid it. It's fine. We are who we are.
Definitely malt loaf. I think smoked cheese and meat would be delicious with this. Liz, you're always great at recommending food pairings. You nailed it last month. And smoked cheese. What do you tend to suggest eating with it, or pairing it with, or mixing it in?
So if and when you come to the distillery, as I'm sure all of you are traveling in northern Finland quite often, where we do dinners there, and there's a number of really good pairings. Obviously, gravlax or this salted salmon is great. Then we do salted butter and slightly sweeter kind of like malt rye loaf, which is a brilliant combination, just as almost like a bar snack type of thing. But Finland, obviously, as a northern country, is also heavy on all sorts of roots. So we do creamy sort of like root dishes with the rye as well, and some pickled stuff. So yeah, you can definitely pair it with fish or meats, and you can imagine in this climate we traditionally prefer kind of like quite warming foods. So that's as an inspiration to pair it with. But for me, as also like from a use case perspective, I saw a comment like whether the US style of whiskies for the UK palate. Well,
I was going to bring that one up. Here you go.
Yeah, there's been a couple of like good articles and discussions about this particular topic, and we know it's not the easiest adoption, but there's also the drinks and cocktail angle that we are proudly involved in with our whiskey. So we're not fussed about kind of neat style of drinking or cocktail drinking. And for me, I just make all my old fashions out of this Kyrö malt that we're drinking now, because like if you make that sort of like very, very spirit forward whiskey cocktail, it works great.
Nice, yeah. Gadget Aaron Master, perhaps not his real name, also asked about an affiliate program. Do you have an affiliate program?
No, not really. I mean, we do have an e-com shop in the UK where we've done a couple of like affiliate campaigns now and then. So you can get our contact address from the site. So please drop us a line if you're interested. We're a small company. We're not backed by any of the big guys. We're still there's 5 of us founders, and we still own and operate most of the company in good and in bad. So we're always keen to get support out there and expand.
What have you got any other releases besides this one? Whiskey releases? Yeah,
so now we've got the core lineup done. So it includes the Kyrö malt, which is kind of like the proper gateway into understanding how Finns think about the taste of rye and what our core distillery character is like. Then we've got an Oloroso cask version, not a PX, because that would be too sweet. Oloroso is perfect for pairing with us. And then we've got 2 different smoky editions out there.
Oh, yeah.
One slightly smaller scale, because we just don't have a lot of it. We don't have a lot of anything really, but there's such a heavy culture of smoky whiskey drinking in the Nordics. So we're using 2 ways. So we're using local alderwood, and we're using local freshwater peat to get some and impart some smoke into the whiskey. And both of them are very unique in their own styles.
And is that done during the malting process?
That's actually not done during the malting process. That's done as a drying process. So there's this historical Finnish custom of quickly drying your rye out when you harvest. You go back out into the fields to plant, because we plant winter rye. The rye needs to go to the ground before the ground freezes. Snow covers it, and then it starts growing in the spring. So you had this short pivot where you had to make sure that you preserve your rye. So you'd burn a bonfire of alderwood or peat to dry it out. And we even have a smoky rye bread tradition in Eastern Finland because of that.
So it's done before malting then?
Yeah.
Interesting. That is interesting. Do you I mean, I guess it's hard to have a sort of comparison thing there. Do you think that imparts more or less smoke into the product than if you were to dry it after malting? Hard to say.
It's a very hard call, because the process differs in a couple of key ways, where if you're doing barley maltings and you're imparting the smoke onto the barley, what you're doing then is that in the mashing you're losing the husk because you're using it to filter the mash. But for us, all the smoke particles are on the outer shell of the grain, all of which goes through all of the process. So you might have like smaller amounts of particles, but then the process takes more of them through. So
you're going to get everything carrying through. Yeah.
So you can't really compare like this in this ppm language, like parts per million language. You can't really make a solid comparison there.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, so that's a Finnish tradition, sort of drying the rye in that way. I mean, do you know of any other distillery anywhere in the world that's smoking grain prior to malting?
No, I mean, there are different styles, but like the smoke type, especially the alder smoke we get on our rye, I would actually, for me, it reminds me of mezcal more than smoky Scottish whiskies, which is really funny because it has this sort of like minerally, very kind of upper register smoke without the very like heavy turfy umami laden touch that peat has. So it's just a very different style.
Interesting. Need to try it. Haven't had it. Awesome. Where are you going? What's next? Like, are you kind of just trying to make enough whiskey for all the people that want it, or is there new products in the pipeline?
I mean, we've always got interesting stuff going on. When I approve our cask buying bills, I always get scared about what's in there because Kalle just goes and gets all sorts of weird stuff. We don't really have a lot of reference points of how rye matures in rum casks or various types of wood and ex-liquid casks. So we're trying out a lot of stuff, and those you'll see coming out as special releases of one kind or another over the coming years. But we're trying to keep it quite simple and small so that you don't get overwhelmed with what's out there and what's the distillery character. So we have some special stuff coming out probably October, November. But until then, we're just doing the core range.
Where are people drinking Kyrö malt rye? What's the big markets for you? Are the Americans bringing loads of it in, or is it Europe?
US is growing quite a lot, but we're not doing a whole lot there yet. We're too small for it still. Finland and Germany are the biggest markets by far. Japan is weirdly enough, or not so weirdly enough, quite good for us, or really good. We're both nations who absolutely love queuing, so cultural similarities. And there's a couple of hot spots around the world, but really domestically we're doing really well. And I mean, we're too small of a market, so that's why we really have to go out there very early on in our company's life. We are only 5.5 million people in a country the size of Germany. There's just nobody home. So we have to get our stuff sold and drank outside our borders. And Germany has been traditionally a very good place for Finnish brands to go to first.
Cool, good stuff. All right, fantastic. Well, thank you both for coming on and chatting about the whiskies.
Pleasure.
Super enlightening and informative and inspiring as well. I mean, I think, Miika, the sort of responsibility in a way that you have, being, I believe, the first whiskey distillery in Finland, right? That's correct, isn't it?
Yeah, no, there's a couple before us, so you should definitely try Teerenpeli if you get your hands on it, or if you can pronounce it. And there's a few others, but we're sort of like the second wave, and the government did everything. So manufacturing, importation, selling until we joined the EU, and then it got sort of liberated in stages, and we're the second wave of craft whiskey now out there.
Yeah, I'm just imagining when you're Glenlossie's age, and obviously, there's 50 distilleries. It's the sort of space side of Finland, and maybe there'll be some kind of ridiculous virtual whiskey tasting going on in 150 years' time, and they'll be talking about the pioneers who started the whole thing, and you'll be like a brain in a box with the robot arms and legs still somehow kept alive. Yeah.
Interviewed by the AI version of you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, look, great. Thank you everyone for watching. Thank you guys for joining. Delicious stuff. and yeah, we'll look forward to drinking more of your stuff in the future. And everyone who joined in and asked questions and shared tasting notes, we appreciate it. And we shall see you next month.